Beneath the ashes of World War lie stories never meant to surface. Sealed tunnels, burned files, signals that should have fallen silent. They whisper of weapons that poisoned Earth itself, of convoys that vanished into snowstorms, of archives buried so deeply that nations conspire to forget them. These are not legends, but fragments torn from classified history. And once you begin to look, you cannot unsee the shadows left behind. On the night of 18th of January 1945, a blizzard swept through the Tyrolean Alps as a convoy of heavy trucks, escorted by elements of the 11th SS Panzergrenadier Division, Nordland, wound its way along a mountain road outside Innsbruck. The mission, designated Operation Nachtsturm in surviving fragments of Reich Main Security Office documents, was not listed in official Wehrmacht records. What little we know comes from a scattering of Allied intelligence intercepts, coded Enigma traffic, and testimony from Alpine villagers who recalled strange movements in the snow that winter. The convoy was never logged on German supply rolls. According to decrypted messages sent between Obergruppenführer Ernst Kaltenbrunner's office in Berlin and SS Obersturmbannführer Helmut Staudt in Innsbruck, the column was transporting Gerät 47, a designation not found in any surviving Waffenamt armaments list. Several US Army Signals Intelligence Service officers who later reviewed the intercepts concluded that the codename referred to either an experimental radar countermeasure device or a prototype of electronic warfare equipment. The Allies had already encountered crude German attempts at radar jamming on the Western Front, but references to Gerät 47 implied something more advanced, something still absent from standard histories of the conflict. Local accounts add unsettling detail. In 1952, an Austrian forestry worker named Josef Ertl gave a sworn statement to the Tyrol provincial authorities claiming he had seen at least 15 vehicles, all painted in whitewash, guarded by black uniformed SS troops on the frozen night in question. He described the convoy halting near a remote rock face, where soldiers unloaded crates the size of coffins and carried them into an already blasted tunnel mouth. Within days, German engineers sealed the opening with explosives. To this day, no official record identifies the location of that tunnel. What little evidence exists was gathered by the Allies in spring 1945. US 7th Army engineers discovered several destroyed trucks near Landeck, charred and abandoned. The corpses of their drivers were never found. An OSS field agent, Captain William Ashcroft, wrote in an April 1945 memo that German personnel from this convoy are presumed to have been evacuated eastward or eliminated. His notes were appended to an intelligence packet marked Eclipse Nachtsturm and then buried in the Washington National Records Center, where it remained classified until partial release in 1987. Even then, large sections were redacted. British intelligence, too, took an interest. A report from Bletchley Park's Hut 6, dated 22nd of February 1945, noted the sudden appearance of cryptographic chatter referencing Schneesturm Phase abgeschlossen, snowstorm phase complete, linked to Nachtsturm. The report concluded the Germans had successfully moved a technological package of high priority out of the reach of advancing Allied forces. The implication, whatever Nachtsturm carried was not destroyed in situ, but successfully transferred, possibly eastward into territory later occupied by the Soviets. Soviet archives provide additional, if fragmentary, hints. In a 1964 debriefing of a captured SS engineer, Soviet GRU officers recorded claims of a large underground facility near Imst. According to the engineer, this site, codenamed Bergwerk, had been prepared to house Nachtsturm's cargo. He stated that the equipment involved electrical interference arrays capable of blinding Allied bomber formations. No confirmation of such a site has ever been found, but aerial reconnaissance photographs from 1946 show unusual cratering patterns in that region, suggesting deliberate demolitions. There are darker implications as well. Villagers from Telfs, interviewed by Austrian authorities in the 1970s, recalled that several local families disappeared in January 1945 after speaking too openly about the trucks that came in the snow. One farmer, Marcus Hutter, told his grandson that he had seen SS men executing civilians near a frozen pass to prevent word of Nachtsturm spreading. No graves were ever located, but the rumor persists in the region, whispered among older generations. What became of Nachtsturm's cargo remains unresolved. Some historians speculate the materials were captured by advancing Red Army units and integrated into post-war Soviet radar research. Others argue that Nachtsturm may have failed, its trucks lost in an avalanche, buried permanently under alpine ice. Yet the persistence of unexplained archival notations, particularly in American files referencing lost special electronics Tyrol, suggest otherwise. Perhaps the most haunting clue surfaced decades later. In 1998, a team of cavers near the Ötztal Alps discovered a sealed tunnel behind collapsed rock. Inside were fragments of wooden crates bearing faint SS runes, alongside corroded electrical coils and copper wiring unlike standard wartime equipment. Radiation surveys conducted by Austrian police registered abnormal spikes, though the cause was never identified. The site was swiftly resealed under the supervision of the Ministry of the Interior, declared unsafe due to structural instability. To date, no official acknowledgement has ever been made by Germany, Austria, or the Allied powers concerning the existence of Operation Nachtsturm. Inquiries filed under the US Freedom of Information Act continue to yield heavily redacted responses. In 2007, the CIA released one document referencing Nachtsturm, though every technical description was blacked out. What is left is a puzzle of half-erased testimonies, burned trucks, missing civilians, and cryptic signals traffic. It speaks to the chaos of the Third Reich's final months, a regime desperate enough to gamble everything on untested technology, hidden away in the snows of the Alps. Whether Nachtsturm was a last bid for survival, an experiment never completed, or simply another ghost operation in the Reich's dying days, remains an open question. Yet the secrecy that has lingered for over 70 years suggests one unsettling possibility. Something from that night in 1945 was recovered, and those who hold it have never allowed the world to know. In the final summer of the Pacific War, US naval intelligence stations across the Central Pacific began intercepting signals that defied categorization. The transmissions, first noted in July 1945, originated from the vicinity of Kwajalein Atoll, then held firmly by American forces after its capture the previous year. Yet these broadcasts were not Japanese imperial codes, nor did they match known Soviet or Allied patterns. The signals contained references to a project codenamed Shinjitsu-73 So. The mystery began with a report filed by Lieutenant Commander Charles N. Whitfield of the Naval Security Group. On 9th of July 1945, his station at Oahu recorded bursts of high-frequency Morse that bore unusual timing intervals. The origin was triangulated to the Marshall Islands, specifically the waters east of Kwajalein. Whitfield noted that the cipher did not conform to JN25 or any other catalogued system. When the intercepts were passed to the Office of Naval Communications in Washington, they were quietly labeled anomalous, keep closed. At that moment, Kwajalein should have been secure. After Operation Flintlock in February 1944, the atoll had become a major US staging base, with thousands of Seabees constructing airstrips and docks. Yet the intercepted signals suggested the presence of an organized radio operation not under American control. Naval intelligence immediately suspected a hidden Japanese garrison. A reconnaissance sweep was ordered, but no survivors, supplies, or equipment were discovered. The islands closest to the transmissions had long since been cleared. Then came the first disturbing clue. On 17 August 1945, just days after Japan's surrender, OSS field agent Thomas Brand filed a memorandum describing captured German documents retrieved from U-234, a submarine seized en route to Japan. Among its cargo of uranium oxide and jet, aircraft parts was a folder marked Verbindung Nippon. Inside was a reference to Gemeinschaft Projekt Shinjitsu-73 Marshallgruppe. The papers suggested a joint operation between German technical advisors and elements of the Japanese Navy, operating from a forward experimental relay. Strangely, Berlin's own records contained no further elaboration, Kwajalein itself soon became the subject of secrecy. By September 1945, the US military abruptly declared several sections of the atoll off-limits to civilian contractors, and even restricted access to Navy personnel not cleared by special order. When pressed, officers explained the closures as measures to secure classified equipment. In truth, declassified correspondence reveals that patrols reported finding buried cabling running from bunkers into the lagoon. Divers retrieved corroded but advanced radio components, glass valves unlike standard Japanese production, and copper coils sealed in waterproof containers. The US Navy's Bureau of Ships analyzed the material in November 1945. A surviving technical summary describes the equipment as non-standard oscillators, potentially adapted for over-the-horizon communication. One line, heavily redacted, even upon release in 1999, notes, design features bear similarity to German naval communication prototypes. Bremen Works, 1943. The conclusion was left unstated, but the implication was clear. Germany had somehow transferred advanced signal technology to the Pacific, and it had been operational in the Marshall Islands as late as 1945. What was its purpose? Some theorists argue Shinjitsu-73 was designed to maintain secure lines between Japan and Germany, bypassing Allied code-breaking dominance. Others believe it was intended as part of an early warning system, triangulating US naval movements across the Pacific. A far more controversial claim appears in a 1946 Army Air Force's intelligence report, which speculated that Shinjitsu-73 might have been a radiological monitoring device intended to track American atomic experiments already underway. That document, too, was classified for decades. The secrecy deepened in the Cold War. In 1954, as nuclear testing expanded across the Marshall Islands, Navy divers conducting pre-test surveys stumbled upon submerged bunkers just beyond Kwajalein's reef. According to testimony by diver Richard, Monsieur Sloan later recorded in 1978, the bunkers contained racks of electrical equipment still wired together. Sloan described rows of power units, glass tubes, and steel plates marked with German lettering. His superior ordered the team out immediately, and when they returned days later, the bunkers had been destroyed with demolition charges. Official records note only that hazardous wreckage was neutralized, yet scattered anomalies refused to disappear. In the archives of the National Security Agency lies a series of uncatalogued intercepts labeled Shinjitsu files. One declassified page from 1945 reads, "Transmission ceased, 2042 local, 14th August. Phrase repeated, Yorokobi wa uso da. Joy is a lie. Final signal strength, severe attenuation. Source likely abandoned or destroyed." Historians attempting to trace Shinjitsu-73 today face silence. Japanese records from the Navy's research bureaus contain no references. German archives are equally barren, save for a cryptic mention in Admiral Karl Donitz's post-war interrogations, where he told Allied officers Japan was given certain instruments beyond their knowledge. Not all of it was ours to disclose. The comment was stricken from the official transcript. Some in Kwajalein still recall whispers. Marshallese elders describe stories of foreign men during the war who came ashore at night, speaking neither Japanese nor English. They were said to carry black crates and vanish into sealed huts. After the surrender, villagers who wandered too near certain islands were reportedly relocated by the US military. No photographs of those sites survive. By the mid-1970s, rumors had spread among divers working for salvage companies in the Pacific. One group claimed to have discovered an undersea tunnel on the atoll's western side, containing collapsed crates stamped with both Japanese kanji and German Gothic script. They retrieved fragments of dials and wires before being ordered off the site by Navy patrol boats. The material vanished into US custody. Today, the official explanation is terse. Shinjitsu-73 never existed, and all recovered materials were misidentified Japanese communications equipment. Yet the persistence of anomalous records, unexplained. Transmissions and deliberate demolition of discovered bunkers suggests otherwise. More than 7 decades later, the truth remains locked in overlapping layers of Allied censorship and Axis disappearance. All that is certain is this. In the closing days of World War II, on an atoll that should have been silent, voices were still transmitting. They spoke in codes no one could break, under a name, Shinjitsu-73, that appears nowhere in the annals of either Tokyo or Berlin. Whether they were the final echo of a failed alliance, or the trace of something more dangerous, remains an unanswered question. On the evening of 27 April 1945, with Berlin in flames and Soviet artillery already pounding the outskirts, a Luftwaffe operation designated Fall Eisenlicht was set in motion from Lübeck airfield. According to fragmentary records uncovered, decades later in US Air Force archives, the mission involved smuggling jet propulsion blueprints, possibly those of the Messerschmitt P1101 and the Heinkel H162, out of collapsing Germany. The destination was Sweden, a neutral country that had quietly hosted German intelligence couriers throughout the war. The aircraft assigned was a modified Junkers Ju-290, capable of long-range flight and specially outfitted for high-priority cargo. Witnesses on the ground confirmed the departure. Surviving members of the ground crew recalled seeing a convoy of black Opel Blitz trucks unloading heavy crates, marked Geheime Reichssache, Reich Secret. Inside were rolled documents and technical equipment escorted by armed SS guards, under Colonel Hans Voss. At 23 ton 10 hours, the aircraft departed Lübeck under cover of darkness. Its flight log, later recovered in a half-burned state, recorded its intended course. Baltic crossing, Stockholm approach, contact Oberbefehlshaber Nord. It never arrived. Swedish radar stations at Gotland detected an unidentified contact at 0041, traveling north by northwest. Operators logged the blip as large transport, low altitude. Minutes later, the signal abruptly vanished. No wreckage was reported and no distress call was intercepted. When Allied forces entered Lübeck 2 days later, no mention of Eisenlicht was found in the Luftwaffe command office. Its flight orders had been pulled, its logbooks burned. Only scattered references survived in intercepted Enigma traffic, one of which chillingly read, Eisenlicht dispatched, status silent. The Allies treated the disappearance with utmost seriousness. A declassified OSS memorandum dated 3rd of May, 1945 details a special search priority for Eisenlicht materials. US Navy reconnaissance aircraft scoured the Baltic Sea for weeks. Divers from the Royal Navy conducted salvage operations off Bornholm. Nothing was found. For decades, official histories described the disappearance as probable loss due to mechanical failure. Yet investigators have long noted the absence of any debris, oil slicks, or bodies, an anomaly given the flight path over shallow waters. The mystery deepened in 1992 when a fisherman trawling east of Gotland pulled up twisted metal fragments, unlike any conventional wartime aircraft. Metallurgical analysis performed by Stockholm's Royal Institute of Technology found isotopic ratios inconsistent with standard German alloys of the period. The fragments exhibited advanced heat-resistant properties, characteristics associated with post-war jet turbine designs. Swedish authorities classified the report as non-conclusive and quietly shelved the results. There is also evidence of Swedish complicity. Diplomatic archives opened in 2001 reveal a telegram from Swedish envoy Göran von Otter to Stockholm, written on 29 April 1945. In it, he cryptically referenced an expected visitor bearing technical gifts. Historians now believe this may have referred to Eisenlicht, but when the transport never arrived, Stockholm suppressed all mention of the arrangement. Whether the aircraft was intercepted, destroyed, or diverted elsewhere remains unknown. Competing theories abound. Soviet intelligence archives suggest that the Red Fleet's Baltic submarines may have engaged Eisenlicht. A declassified GRU interrogation of a Soviet submarine officer in 1946 mentions the downing of a German courier plane carrying materials of unusual nature. Yet no submarine log corroborates this claim, and Soviet files remain heavily redacted. Another possibility raised by American analysts is that Eisenlicht succeeded, not to Sweden, but to Soviet-controlled territory, where the blueprints were seized and later influenced post-war MiG jet designs. Still others argue that Eisenlicht never left German control at all. A British Air Ministry report from 1947 cited testimonies of local villagers near Lübeck who heard a second takeoff that night, an escort fighter not listed in Luftwaffe records. Some suggest Eisenlicht may have been diverted to a secret airstrip in occupied Denmark, its cargo hidden before the war's end. If true, the whereabouts of those blueprints and the technology they contained remain unaccounted for. What adds further weight to the mystery is the silence of Hans Voss. Captured by the Allies in May 1945, he was interrogated extensively during the Nuremberg proceedings. When pressed about Eisenlicht, he denied knowledge. Yet in a private note, scribbled during his imprisonment, later smuggled out by a fellow inmate, Voss allegedly wrote, "The light of iron flew, but into whose hands?" Cold War intelligence agencies never abandoned the trail. CIA files from the 1950s reveal repeated references to lost Luftwaffe transport, Eisenlicht, often linked to Soviet jet advancements. The files remained classified for decades, fueling speculation that the US too may have recovered fragments. Indeed, the US Air Force's sudden progress with turbine metallurgy in the late 1940s has been cited by conspiracy theorists as evidence of Eisenlicht's capture. The truth is buried under layers of conflicting testimony, missing archives, and deliberate obfuscation. No definitive proof has ever surfaced of what happened over the Baltic that night. All we have are the fragments, a radar blip that vanished, crates of blueprints that never arrived, and metal recovered decades later that should not have existed in 1945. Eisenlicht remains one of the most enduring enigmas of the war's final hours. Whether it represents a failed escape, a Soviet interception, or a successful transfer buried in Cold War secrecy, its disappearance continues to haunt the grey edges of the historical record. To this day, Swedish fishermen speak of the ghost, plain of the Baltic, a legend born from silent steel and the cold waters that swallowed both the truth and the men who carried it. In February 1945, as the Red Army closed in on Lower Silesia, a series of frantic construction projects were underway beneath the mountains near Walbzich. Local Polish labourers conscripted by the organisation Todt were told they were digging storage tunnels for fuel. But testimony collected after the war reveals the orders came from the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, under an operation codenamed Projekt Morgenrot, Red Dawn. Unlike conventional weapons depots, Morgenrot was designed to safeguard documents. According to fragments of testimony preserved in Polish Security Service, SB files, the vaults were packed not with ammunition, but with wooden crates stenciled, with foreign markings, British lion crests, American insignia, even Cyrillic stamps. Captured Abwehr officer Otto Hermann, interrogated by the SB in 1949, claimed the crates contained intelligence archives confiscated in occupied Europe, intercepts, codebooks, diplomatic files, even OSS dossiers seized in France. Hermann insisted the intention was to deny all sides the intelligence bounty. "We knew the Reich would fall," he told his captors, "but if the world went blind, perhaps the Reich could rise again." His words were dismissed as propaganda, until in 1961, Soviet engineers conducting geological surveys stumbled across massive subterranean structures near Walbrzich. Their notes, retrieved decades later, describe reinforced concrete vaults with blast doors and evidence of deliberate flooding. The Soviets immediately sealed off the area, declaring it a strategic no-go zone. Locals were barred from entering. The forests and entire villages were displaced. Moscow claimed it was for uranium prospecting, but no mines were ever established. Rumors spread among villagers that deep inside the mountains lay the archives of half the world, buried by the Germans in the chaos of defeat. Allied interest predated the Soviet discovery. A 1946 OSS memorandum, partially declassified in 1993, mentions special cache Morgenrot, Silesia, and warns of potential loss of Allied wartime codes and reports. The document references an urgent search by US Counterintelligence Corps (CIC) teams, who interrogated displaced German engineers in Bavaria about tunnel works in the Owl Mountains. Yet none of their searches yielded results. The Soviets, already in control of the territory, kept their findings tightly guarded. Some pieces, however, slipped through. In 1973, a Polish coal miner named Zbigniew Wróbel told investigators he had discovered a sealed concrete wall during drilling operations near Książ Castle, a known Nazi headquarters in the region. Behind it, he claimed, was a vast chamber filled with rusting crates and filing cabinets. His account was dismissed, and the mine was abruptly closed. Wróbel later emigrated, leaving behind only a sworn affidavit. Additional fragments come from declassified East German Stasi files. A 1982 internal report cites foreign materials of Anglosphere origin located within Morgenrot. The same report describes efforts by Soviet archivists to microfilm selected documents and transport them to Moscow. Curiously, Western intelligence services noticed a sudden improvement in Soviet cryptographic analysis around this time, leading some historians to speculate that Morgenrot indeed contained Allied codebooks seized during the war. Polish researchers, who attempted to follow the trail after 1990, encountered obstruction. Requests to access Moscow's supposed Morgenrot microfilm archive have been denied. Excavation attempts near Wolbozich have been blocked by the Ministry of Culture, citing heritage preservation. In 2015, rumors of a Nazi gold train discovered in the same area rekindled public interest, but no train was found, raising the possibility that stories of treasure may have been deliberate cover for something far more valuable: paper. One unsettling clue comes from a letter written by General Ivan Serov, former head of the KGB, to Nikita Khrushchev in 1962. The letter, unearthed in Russian archives, warns, Morgenrot is both a gift and a danger. Contained within are not only secrets of the enemy, but also records that could embarrass our allies. The phrasing suggests that among the vaults lay sensitive Soviet files, perhaps NKVD dossiers captured during Germany's advance into Ukraine and Belarus. If true, Morgenrot was not merely a Nazi archive, but a repository of Europe's stolen intelligence. Local legend persists. Older residents of Wolbozich recall stories of German trucks loaded with documents arriving at night in early 1945, guarded by SS units who executed laborers after completion. Some claim to have heard drilling noises echoing through the mountains well into the spring of that year, long after the front had passed. Others whisper that in the 1970s, Soviet convoys removed truckloads of crates from sealed tunnels under armed guard. Officially, nothing has ever been recovered. Yet historians note that entire sections of Allied wartime intelligence remain inexplicably missing. OSS files on German industrial espionage in the US simply vanish after late 1944. British intercepts from the Mediterranean campaign contain unexplained gaps. Even NKVD reports from occupied Warsaw bear signs of having been copied from German duplicates. The missing link may well be buried beneath the Silesian mountains. Projekt Morgenrot endures as one of the least understood legacies of the war, a vault not of gold or weapons, but of knowledge, documents powerful enough to alter the balance of power in the fragile post-war world. Whether it remains sealed in concrete beneath Wolbozich, or whether its contents were quietly absorbed into Soviet intelligence, the archive has never been publicly revealed. To this day, hikers in the Owl Mountains sometimes stumble upon collapsed tunnels bricked with reinforced concrete, their entrances scarred by demolition charges. Graffiti scrawled by retreating workers reads, "Kein Ausgang," no exit. The mountains hold their silence, and with it, the secrets of Morgenrot. Until the vaults are opened, if they ever are, the question remains unanswered. What did the Nazis bury so carefully that three superpowers conspired to keep it hidden? In August 1945, mere days after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, An obscure memorandum circulated within the Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, CIOS, in London. It referred to a cache of captured German research, codenamed File Kassandra. The papers, according to the memo, described experimental weapons designed to disperse radiological material, what later generations would call dirty bombs. The provenance of these files has never been clarified. British records insist they were destroyed. American archives claim they were seized intact. Soviet intelligence accused both sides of deception. The earliest known reference appears in an OSS field report from 17th May 1945. US counterintelligence corps officers in Bavaria had raided an abandoned Luftwaffe research station outside Augsburg. Among the debris were charred binders stamped Heereswaffenamt, Sonderakte, K. Within, investigators described studies concerning dispersal of powdered isotopes via conventional explosive delivery. One chilling sketch depicted a steel shell filled with a fine particulate labeled A-Strahlungsstoff. The report noted, practical viability uncertain. However, intent to contaminate battlefield evident. The material was marked for urgent transfer to CIOS headquarters. And then, the trail fractured. When British interrogators at Farm Hall questioned captured German physicists later that summer, none admitted knowledge of a radiological weapons program. Otto Hahn scoffed at the idea as militarily pointless. Yet a separate MI6 memo, dated October 1945, references the Kassandra files, now secure. Its author urged destruction, warning that the documents represented an unholy marriage of German desperation and scientific irresponsibility. Months later, the British declared the files had been eliminated. No physical evidence of that destruction has ever surfaced. Across the Atlantic, the story differs. Declassified US Army records reveal that Major Robert Harrington, CIC, personally oversaw the transfer of captured Kassandra documents to the Manhattan Engineer District. His inventory, filed in November 1945, lists 45 Lelby's technical papers, K-series. Yet those papers never appeared in the Manhattan District's archives. A handwritten note on the file reads, "Divided per instruction, Projekt paperclip." Some historians interpret this as proof that fragments of Kassandra were quietly handed to American laboratories under the guise of conventional atomic research. The Soviets, meanwhile, pursued their own leads. In 1947, GRU officers interrogated a German scientist named Kurt Diehl, captured near Dresden. According to transcripts preserved in Moscow, Diehl confirmed working on radiological particles for area denial, though he claimed the project never advanced beyond preliminary tests. He insisted prototypes had been destroyed in March 1945, when SS units dynamited the facility to prevent capture. The Soviets never located the site. Yet only months later, Soviet nuclear physicists suddenly began conducting experiments with dispersal of radioactive salts, a line of inquiry previously absent from their research. The possibility of a prototype haunts the record. A US Army intelligence file from February 1946, heavily redacted but partially released in 2005, describes field contamination tests conducted by German units in the Bavarian forest, January 1945. Local villagers near Mittenwald recalled being warned away from cordoned woodlands by Wehrmacht guards. After the war, farmers complained of barren soil patches where nothing grew for years. Allied health officers attributed the effect to chemical spills. Others quietly noted the symptoms of radiation sickness among livestock. The murk only deepened during the Cold War. In 1952, British intelligence received reports that the CIA had retrieved a cache of German scientific files from a warehouse in Marburg. Among them was said to be a folder marked Kassandra. The British protested, reminding Washington that Kassandra had been destroyed. The Americans denied possession, yet internal CIA memoranda from the 1960s, released under FOIA, contain repeated references to Kassandra-type devices in the context of Soviet military preparedness. Someone, somewhere, still had the files. The secrecy is perhaps understandable. A functional German radiological weapon in 1945 would have rewritten the closing months of the war. Even without a nuclear chain reaction, the psychological impact of a weapon that could poison entire cities would have been catastrophic. Historians point out that by early 1945, the Reich had lost the industrial capacity to mass-produce such devices, but the intent and the research were real enough to alarm Allied authorities. Today, the evidence exists only in fragments: the Augsburg Field Report, scattered references in CIOS files, redacted CIA notes. Yet the pattern is consistent. All three great powers, the US, Britain, and the USSR, were aware of file Kassandra. All denied having it, and all pursued suspiciously similar research into radiological dispersal in the decade that followed. In 1989, a retired US Army Chemical Corps officer anonymously testified to a journalist that during the 1950s, he had reviewed German documents describing contamination munitions. He recalled the code name Kassandra, but claimed the pages had long since been transferred to the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. His story was never corroborated, but it echoes too closely the archival traces to be dismissed outright. Perhaps the most unsettling legacy lies not in what Kassandra contained, but in what it symbolized. A vision of warfare where the battlefield itself became uninhabitable, poisoned not by bombs, but by dust. Whether or not the Germans achieved a working device is almost irrelevant. The Allies believed they might have, and acted accordingly, burying the evidence, silencing witnesses, and folding whatever knowledge they gleaned into their own arsenals. The name itself, Kassandra, may have been prophetic. In Greek myth, Kassandra spoke truths no one would believe until it was too late. The files that bore her name may have warned of a future the Allies could not afford to acknowledge openly, a world where the most terrifying weapons were not the atomic bombs that ended the war, but the invisible poisons that could follow. The archive remains missing. The forest near Mittenwald still contains patches of ground where nothing grows. And in the sealed vaults of Washington, London, and Moscow, redacted references continue to hint at a project that was never supposed to exist. Until those files emerge, Feel Kassandra lingers as one of the most chilling ghosts of the war, an erased chapter, hidden because the truth was too dangerous to be told. What was buried was never gone. It lingers in redacted reports, in concrete walls sealing mountain vaults, in the barren soil where nothing grows. Truth erased is never truly destroyed. It seeps like radiation, unseen but deadly, shaping what followed in silence. The war ended, but its secrets did not. They remain out there, waiting for those who dare to uncover what was never meant to be remembered.